Modern Eater Network production. Hell yeah. Let's get this party hopping. No more milling around. Get ready to have a mash ton of fun. Here are your hosts, Andrew Moore and Jeff Tyler.
Hey everybody, it's 4 o'clock on a Monday, and that means it's time for another episode of Beer Craft, Colorado's craft beer show, coming at you live from Studio Kitchen, Colorado, home of the Modern Eater Network. My name is Andrew Moore. I'm here with my co-host and owner-brewer of Spice Trade Brewing, Jeff Tyler. And we are rolling on into June from May, and we're continuing this month, because there's so much to talk about, we're continuing looking at all of these sort of new and interesting and unique products that seem to be coming on the market that people are wondering, is this beer? Is this something else?
Yeah, there's a lot of products that are kind of blurring the line between beer and other beverages, and there's a lot of cool breweries in Denver that are working on those projects. We had Judd Bellstock on the show of Dos Luces talking about the chicha that he's making, which is a sort of a corn beer hybrid. We had Dr. Keith Villa on the show from Seria Brewing Company. He makes de-alcoholized THC-infused beer, and lots of interesting stuff from both of those guys, making some products that I think are really starting to take off and that people are really enjoying.
So on Saturday, I was coming back into Denver on I-25, coming south.
Yeah.
And there's one of those like adopt a road signs.
Yeah.
And it was Seria Brewing Company.
Really?
Cleaning up I-25. I was like,
there you go.
I know that guy.
They're doing good for the community.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. So we're continuing our theme this month, and we have a little bit of a power situation here. There's a storm brewing right now.
It's
actually,
beer craft, so that also means that the weather outside is bad.
Yeah, we were just talking before we started about like every episode we've had being during a snowpocalypse, and right now there's like a massive thunderstorm. So the lights, if you lose us, we'll be back. Just stay tuned. But I think we're good right now. I think we're good. But yeah, we have a really great guest today from Liberati Osteria Oenobeers, Alex Liberati and Mike Kelly. We're gonna chat with them in a little bit. They're doing some really cool work with beer-wine hybrids.
Yeah, I'm excited. But we've been a little off this month. We had some scheduling issues, and of course the holiday weekend.
Yeah.
With
Memorial Day.
Whatever it's called.
Yeah.
And
I was there for that.
yeah, I had a good one too. Thanks.
Yep.
And but you checked it. You got a chance to go down south and check out some beer.
I did. Yeah. I went down to Santa Fe, New Mexico for the weekend. Sort of a work and pleasure trip. I was actually doing a little bit of shopping for some pretty cool items that we're going to be putting up in our new tap room. But as I do when I go anywhere, I also checked out the local beer and food scene. And Santa Fe is a cool little spot. You know, they're definitely known for their art. The Georgia O'Keeffe Museum is there. Meow Wolf is there. They have a lot of local artists. But the beer scene is starting to, really gain some ground there. I had some cool beer. If you've ever gone to Santa Fe or any part in New Mexico, green chili and red chili are everywhere. Green chili and red chili are just like the two main food groups in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So obviously I found a brewery that had green chili and red chili infused into the beer. It was this brewery called Chili Line, and all they do is Rausch beer. But I thought the green chili and red chili beer were pretty cool. My favorite brewery, though, that I went to was called Rowley Farmhouse Ales. And they're making some really cool farmhouse style beer. They also have a really great guest list of other farmhouse breweries from all over the U.S. They had a really cool beer. It was called Petite Blanche. It was a 3.6% Galaxy Saison, and it was just awesome. But they're doing fun stuff. They have fooders there, and they have a really good food menu as well. So I would definitely recommend checking that spot out if you're ever in the neighborhood.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I want to talk to whoever got them all the Galaxy hops.
Yeah, they were very fresh, and I don't know where they got them from, but
well, I'm curious about this Rauch beer place too, because I feel like that's maybe the second Rauch beer brewery in the world after Schlenkerla and Bamberg.
Yeah,
that's a commitment.
It is a commitment. I think it's a challenging commitment. Smoke, I don't think plays well with every flavor profile, which I think makes it has a tendency to clash sometimes. So you have to be real careful about how you make smoked beers.
But but then I think about historically, a lot of beers would have had like a subtle smoke character to them, just because of the way that the malt was kilned,
Right.
directly or indirectly, you would have had a lot of that smoke.
Yeah. It's cool to see the level of specialization, though, even in a city that's not really known for, like, an amazing craft beer scene. Like, there is a brewery there, and that's all they do. So it's kind of cool to see people specialize. I mean, we talk about specialization a lot, especially this month, given the topic. We talk about it a lot in the breweries in the Denver area, but it's cool to see that happening in another city as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. What else? What's going on in Spice Trade Brewing?
What's going on with Spice Trade Brewing, man? There's a lot going on. We have, let's see, we're Brewery of the Month up at Superior Liquor. If anybody lives near Superior Liquor, the store is fantastic. It's massive. And we got our GABF booth set up in the store. Got tons of beer, ridiculous prices, so definitely go check that out. And we have a couple fun beers that we're working on. We have a Limoncello Saison that we brewed last year. We're rebrewing it this year. Actually, we're brewing it tomorrow. So that'll be released in a couple weeks. And then we're brewing, I think we talked about it a couple weeks ago. So we do this fundraiser every year with the Katie Adamson Foundation. They're an animal conservation group. They do a lot of work in Nepal and Africa. Last year we did a fundraiser with them that helped raise money to build beehives as a conservation effort to keep elephants outside of sort of the area where the natives live to prevent poaching. And those beehives got built with the help of some of the money that we helped raise. And now this year the honey made it back to Denver, and we're brewing, or actually last week we brewed a Belgian table beer with some of this honey, and we're going to add a couple cool herbs and botanicals to it as well, and that'll come out really limited batch, but just because we don't have a lot of honey.
Yeah.
But that'll be probably mid to end of this month as well.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm excited. I want to know what that honey tastes like.
Yeah,
you should just like save a spoonful and bring it in.
Yeah, maybe I will. It's super crystallized. Like when we first got them, we thought that there was a bunch of wax in it still, but there wasn't. It's just like it's really crystallized, really sweet. Obviously, honey's really sweet. You kind of get a little bit of that orangey, maybe vanilla flavor from the flowers, but it doesn't have kind of an extreme level of floral flavor or aroma. So I'm interested to see what it tastes like once all that sugar gets fermented out in the beer.
Yeah, that's cool. We learned last year with the honey board, like there's just such a wide variety of flavor with honey. It's not just like, I put honey in this. But you can actually like build specific flavor profiles with different kinds of honey, and like it seems like an obvious thing to say, but before they came in and they were like, taste all these honeys.
Yeah,
I had no idea. I was kind of blown away.
One honey tastes like marshmallows, the next one tastes like lavender, one of them tastes like hookah smoke. There's like all sorts of this like spectrum of flavors you get depending on the flowers.
Cool. We just put some orange blossom honey. We just brewed a Belgian blonde with orange blossom honey and a bunch of heather flowers. So I'm excited to see how those kind of floral notes play with each other in the next couple of weeks. And then we got a connection through Growers Organic and Brian Freeman, who's a part of the Modern Eater show, to Fiddlehead Ferns. So we're doing a Fiddlehead Fern IPA.
What is a fiddlehead fern?
So a fiddlehead fern, it's a fern, and the fiddlehead, so it's basically picked young, and it looks like a shepherd's crook, except that it continues to curl in to the center, and you saute them up and eat them kind of like asparagus. Yeah, we can put them in a salad or something like that. So it'll have some nice kind of herbal hop quality to it, the IPA. So that'll be in July.
That's great. I definitely want to try that.
I'm excited. When they sent me the list, they're like, "Hey, we have these ferns." It's like,
you're like, "Yep,
take them." Yep,
I'll take 3.
Yeah, 3. Yeah. We're gearing up for First Friday in the Arts District this June 7th. First Friday in the Arts District on Santa Fe.
Yeah, that's always a good time.
Yeah. So the weather's supposed to be great, unlike today, because we won't be doing a show.
Yeah.
And
we should make a note never to do a show during First Friday, just
please.
so the weather gods don't get upset.
Yeah, I would appreciate that.
Yeah, but you guys are going to have the Big Beer Garden.
Yeah, we just released a bottling run of our Tequila Pear Sour. It was a collaboration we did with First Draft downtown, Mark and those guys. It came out really nice. We actually worked with the Square Barrel people, and we used the squirrel. We soaked the squirrel staves in tequila and then used the squirrel like a hopback. So we recirculated the hot wort through the squirrel.
Nice.
Prior to cooling on the way to the fermenter.
That's great.
Pick up a lot of those flavors.
You guys did that for Collab Fest too, right? So was it similar? Or?
So it was about the same time, but I think they released it in their tap room in February.
Gotcha.
So we held on to some, put it in bottles. And
special release.
Yeah, it'll just keep getting cooler with all the funkiness in there.
Yeah. That's a good beer to cellar.
So
hold on to for a little while.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, let's get in and bring our guests on the show here. Alex Liberati and Mike Kelly from Liberati Osteria Oenobeers. Thanks for coming on and joining us to talk about beer and beer hybrids and is this even beer?
Well, thanks for having us.
Thank you much.
Yeah, appreciate you guys coming out. So, Alex, I think you have a real interesting background that I'd love to touch on. You're an Italian native. You grew up in Rome, is that right?
Yep, born and raised in Rome.
Born and raised in Rome, the land of wine.
More or less, yeah. Well, we changed that a little bit, didn't we? But we do have a lot of breweries now. I mean, around 1,200 breweries.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I want to talk to you about because you were, I mean, part of this craft. A lot of people don't know that Italian craft beer is sort of this burgeoning little microcosm in Italy, and you were really a pretty big part, I think, of creating that shift towards getting beer that people were unaware of, even having flavors that they would think of being beer, and kind of getting that into people's glass, and kind of shifting the conversation away from wine a little bit, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, it was something natural, I think, at that point in time. We started brewing out in 1996 in Italy. 3 breweries started out. And then by 2017, we had around 1,100 breweries, now around 1,200 breweries. So, around 2000, so we started in 96, 2017, 2006 instead. So 10 years later, it was only around 70 breweries. So, there's been a recent explosion. Yeah. And so it was really nice to be a part of that, of course. It was also kind of easy and natural in a certain way, because when people really don't have the possibility to access to, try any good beer, as soon as you give them a glass of something which is really good, or something which is different, it completely blows their mind, and immediately, it's a finer line to walk, I think, when people are already used to a kaleidoscope of so many different flavors that are in beer, especially like in a place which is so mature like Denver, right. Then to introduce something a little bit different, because we're speaking about could be a nuance to someone, For me, it's very strongly different, but, for other people, it could be picked up as a subtlety. Yeah. And, in a place where no one's ever had an IPA, you give an IPA to someone, and they're like, wow, is this beer?
Yeah,
Could this,
right,
so
it's so much different.
Even just a Weiss beer, that was actually the start of getting people more aware of beer, of actually, something there being more than industrial lager, was a Weiss beer, which, just out of the fact that it was cloudy, people think, oh my God, what is this?
The defect with this beer, something's wrong with it, because you're used to mass market lighter lagers, right?
Exactly. A little bit like what's happening in the world of wine with natural wines and unfiltered wines. That's historically always been the case, but, we after the, industrialization, we're all used to filtered wines, and so now that some courageous winemakers are now making wines which are non-filtered, that's really something that's striking the eyes of people. That's one of the things that they remember, is like it had sediment.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about how you got into beer, because at the time that you got into beer, you were shuttling beer across the border from Germany and Belgium into Italy, right? You were packing your Volkswagen with crates of beer and bringing it back to share with your friends. What was that like when your friends first tried something that they didn't even know tasted like beer?
Well, that was what lit the spark in me, honestly. Seeing those reactions, and we just didn't have anything like that down in Italy. So we used to have rooftop parties and the usual barbecues that you have with your friends, and hey, try this, try that, try a beer with the honey and pears. What's it called now? Well, it's a beer from Kerkom Brewery from Belgium, right? And the Blossom, it's called, and you could see people just completely say, oh my God, what is this? Or try a Guz, or Lambic, because obviously those are readily accessible for, a reasonable price in Italy, and so especially even Belgium, $4 for a bottle, And so when, we introduce people to sour beer as well, that's completely mind-blowing. At the time, there wasn't a lot of hoppy ales, because obviously Belgium, Germany, England, Scandinavia was just starting out with their things, and they were in a little pocket up there, not really introducing that to the rest of Europe in a certain way. So, but I do remember that the reactions of people were just it's like someone never seeing a C before and then they see a C. You know, imagine that reaction. How can you describe that? You know,
that's tough. Yeah. And so that kind of that interaction with all your friends and seeing that response to this beer sort of inspired you to open up Brasserie 420, which was the first like beer or craft beer bar in Rome, 70 taps at the time. That's kind of unheard of, right? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, when I was 22 when I started out, so, you know, 420 was, you know, you got to have a little bit of patience for me for choosing that name at the time. No one knew about what that meant in Italy, so that was actually, why is it called 420? It's a closing time. But yeah, it was something quite particular for people. No one really ever thought that there could be something like more than two types of beer, the dark one and the light one, or maybe a stronger one, you know. Instead, starting to introduce all the different styles, that was something quite of a breakthrough. It wasn't easy to start with. I mean, it was kind of natural because people naturally started coming in more and more and more. But, you know, for the first year, it wasn't the easiest procedure ever. You know, there's a lot of education that has to go with bringing a new product into the market, right?
Especially at a time in Italy where Italians are very well known for their knowledge of taste, I think. And I think that they think that their knowledge of taste is top-notch. But the reality of facts is that I had to speak with people and say, hey, look, bitter is like coffee, sour is like lemon. And some people were confusing that. And, you know, I was like, no, this is not sour. No, this is bitter. Oh, so that was really a from-the-ground-up education to be done there. Might be because, you know, of the rural mentality of many Italians. I don't know. But, you know, maybe many Italians haven't really, you know taste, but haven't really theorized it in any way.
It's something when you're doing something that's sort of new in the market and you go through that education process. I mean, I remember hearing, people in the U.S. who were starting beers in the mid and early 90s that were kind of on the forefront of this wave talking about something similar where they were like, yeah, our big challenge was we had to educate people, right? They didn't know what craft beer was, right? It was a mass-produced light lager, like you said. And so it was, beer can taste like this too, and it can taste like this too. And I mean, that's part of we're still going through that. And I mean, we're still doing that sort of taste education, right? We still have people come into Intrepid and say, oh, like this coffee beer is really sour. And you're like, no, that's not sour. Absolutely. That's coffee, and it has this little bit maybe of acidity to it, but it's something different. And it usually is. It's like, oh, it's okay.
And sometimes it's actually a name thing, right? So if you say sour to someone in the beer world, it's okay. If you say sour to someone in the wine world, it's not really okay.
Yeah.
Because it's considered a flaw, acetic acid, right? At the same time, all the beers that we produce at Liberati are, by some measure, sour. And the reason why is because using grapes or grape products, we have a different acidity that we are introducing to, malic acid, just to name it, that converts to lactic acid. You got citric acid. You have so many different tartaric acid acidities that actually get into the beverage. And so your beverage is definitely of a lower pH than a normal average beer, or than the same product without the grapes. At the same time, if you call it sour, people are going to think, ooh, that's going to have some vinegar-like notes, or it's going to be really low and pungent, in pH. I mean, really low in pH and pungent. And this is not the case. So there is also, you're right, sort of an education on, like, the term, and that's why we never
Well, it's hard, too.
about
I think you point to something that breweries often struggle with or talk about. Is like, it's not just what it literally tastes like, right? There's also a marketing element and sort of an expectation that's built into that, where it's like, if you say sour, I expect this. If you say coffee, I expect this kind of a thing.
Or if you call something beer, there's a general expectation with what it'll be, which I think with breweries that are blurring the line between beverages, it's hard to use beer as a descriptor because it doesn't really fit the general profile of what people expect. And I definitely want to get back to some of the technical brewing aspects that you touched on, because I think it's an extremely unique and interesting process.
And stop me if I go too deep, because I can bore myself sometimes.
Oh, that's fine. You won't bore us, I promise. But I just kind of want to go through your background, because it's so interesting. So you open this craft beer bar, and then you find out that, the the beer quality isn't good enough through my distributors, so I have to start a distribution company or an importing company.
Yep.
And so you start importing your own beer to Italy. And then you say, oh, I can't get enough beer. I'm going to start an export company from the U.S. to start exporting more beer to Italy. When do you sleep? I'm curious, because I'm looking at your resume, and it's like year after year, you just keep kind of building on.
I was younger, so, you know, you can do this when you're like 22, 24, 26, you know.
Yeah.
Not anymore, but, you know, well, I mean.
But you brought these hoppy beers, right? You brought Great Divides, Titan IPA to Italy. What was it like when the Italian beer drinker got their first taste of fresh hoppy beer?
Well, that was the first IPA that ever hit Italy, by the way. And we had Great Divide and Flying Dog, which was from Colorado at the time.
Yep.
And the people lined out of the door. And it's not that we made any particular press release or any particular big deal or event of it. It was just people in the know and the people that knew about craft beer and people starting to, you know, have a little bit more attention. So it wasn't this marketing stunt. It was just a very natural thing.
Authentic thing.
And people were completely blown away, you know. And Titan is a great beer because it also is a simple beer. You know, it's not extreme, it's not unbalanced, it's not, you know. And so that's why I think that was very surprising because, you know, today, 15 years later, you give someone a glass of IPA in Italy, and they're looking for mosaic hops, right? Or for whatever the new hop is of the craze, you know. So that was definitely different times. Even Imperial Russian stouts, you know, not even just speaking about hoppy ales, but, you know, no one thought that you could brew a Yeti, for example, you know, and have a 10-point-something% Imperial Russian stout, which is actually drinkable and balanced and not this alcohol bomb, you know, like some industrial reference that they might have had in their minds. Sure. So that was really cool. And the distribution, the import was something really natural just because, you know, as you said before, our distributors didn't really have good beer. Now finally there's someone doing it. Now there's finally someone importing refrigerated and having a refrigerated warehouse. And it's actually a gentleman from Denver that is doing this.
Oh, really?
And that's good, yeah, because he's really revolutionizing the landscape in Italy and France. But Italy especially is, you know, a hotter country. And so, you know, when you store beer in a hot warehouse, you know, I mean, hey, especially if we're speaking about something delicate.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting to kind of see this, you know, Italy kind of creating its own craft beer identity, starting to bring in these exported beers from the U.S., really hop-forward beer. And then you decide to move to the U.S. to start your own brewery. You were doing a gypsy brewery in Italy for a little while, right?
Yeah, so it was when I imported beer, I started asking brewers to produce some beers for me because I thought that there was the beers that we were missing out on. And then I eventually started brewing them with them. And then I eventually started brewing them under my name at their breweries. And then I eventually opened my own brewery in the UK because in Italy it's completely bonkers and, you know, the bureaucracy is completely, you know, insane. And so now it's much better. But at the time it was completely impossible. So after the brewery in the UK and being there for, you know, bars, restaurants, I decided to come over here just because, you know, it's so much better. And I think that people are ready for this kind of style here, I think. Oenobeers.
Yeah. And Oenobeers, that's a term that you coined, Oenobeer. And it's amazing. It must be pretty cool to literally create a style of beer, this beer-wine hybrid, coin a name for it, and now other breweries are making that style of beer. Other breweries are opening up with similar concepts, right?
Yes. I mean, obviously, Oenobeers have been here far before I came along, and there's been people doing them commercially far before I have, you know, and just in Denver, there's an enormous quantity of really awesome Oenobeers out there. Bear, for example, produces one with the Viognier grapes. It's a really nice farmhouse saison-ish kind of beer with, I think the grapes are from Palisade. Spanglang has another really awesome Imperial Russian stout with Tempranillo grapes. They're Nightwalker con Alma. Avery's done a bunch in the past. I mean, it's definitely something out there, but I think that why I committed to this is because there is a lot of technical aspects of it that you have to work on if you want to go to the next level of creating them.
Yeah, let's dig into the technical thing, because it's, you're essentially, the style of beer you're making is 50% grape. Up to 50% grape as the fermentable, whereas traditional beer is 100% barley or a portion of wheat or something like that. So, your process is not just like you're brewing beer. Your process is a hybrid between how brewers make beer and how vintners make wine.
Yep.
So what are the main differences when you're brewing a beer with up to 50% grape as the fermentable?
Well, I just want to remind people as we sort of get into this technical section that we are live on Facebook.
Yeah.
And if you're out there, if you're home brewing or if you're commercial brewing and you have questions for Alex or Mike, feel free to throw them up on Facebook.
Oh, please do.
Yeah. And we'll make sure we make time for you. So that said, what are some of those differences?
I mean, actually, my whole love for Oenobeers starts from drinking a home brew. So I'm definitely very much in love with the home brewing, and I'm very happy to speak about Oenobeers until the wheels fall off, I think you say in America. But for example, something that we were speaking about before that we started the show about diacetyl and Chardonnay. Right? So that comes from Enococcus, which is a bacteria that gets inoculated to transform malic acid into lactic acid. So malic acid, it's a more pungent kind of acid. It's a more, how do you describe it? Let's keep it pungent acid, and instead lactic is softer, of course. And so when you inoculate this bacteria called Enococcus, it transforms malic acid into lactic acid, and obviously some strains in particular at some temperatures and in some conditions do produce diacetyl during the process. So that's something that, for example, they like in the Chardonnays of the West Coast. That's something that you don't really find in old world making wine making.
And it's considered an off flavor when you find it in beer too, right?
Unless you're in Great Britain or Czech Republic, where everyone seems to be deeply fond of it for some reason.
Right.
There's actually a brewery in England that actually makes a beer called Best Butter. Not my thing. But anyway, so the whole idea is that you're going to have malic acid in your Oenobeer to start with anyway. And
because it comes from the grapes.
Because it comes from the grapes. And on the grapes, there's an enormous quantity of bacteria, mold, and wild yeast, which will eventually, very, very probably, convert that malic acid into lactic acid. It will happen eventually if you don't, sterilize it or stop it with sulfites in some way. So what happens is that if you do not control that process, you probably will end up with two things: either exploding bottles, because obviously during that process there's also CO2 produced, and a lot of it, or diacetyl. And I think that that's one of the differences when you approach making Oenobeers with another kind of mindset that you have to be conscious of and that you want to nail down and prevent, right? So not a lot of breweries that even work with fruit have Enococcus ready in, their freezer to use. We do have to.
So how do you communicate that to somebody who maybe might be coming in as a pretty savvy beer drinker? They might know their general off flavors and know that diacetyl, which kind of has this like buttery popcorn flavor to it, is typically an off flavor. Mm-hmm. They come into your brewery, they have a beer, they taste the diacetyl.
No. Wait a second. So we use a particular Enococcus which does not produce diacetyl.
Okay.
So my approach is I don't want to have the defects of beer or wine. That's why we don't have acetic acid in our beers. In the majority of our beers, I try to prevent that. I'm not saying I'm not going to make one in maybe a red sour Flemish ale inspired beer.
Sure.
But we definitely don't, perceived diacetyl is a good thing. It's not my kettle of fish.
Sure. Yeah. So you're saying
Sorry
that.
for interrupting.
No. You need to. So you're saying that any flavor that is considered an off flavor in beer, even if it's acceptable in some forms of wine, you're working very hard to control that to prevent it from getting into your
Absolutely. Beer. Yeah. A little bit too hard sometimes, I feel, with all the cleaning procedures that we have. And then when we use all these grapes, we're putting something which is way more dirty or infected into a very, very clean vessel, Right. So there's definitely no monoinoculation going on there. But we have other means to work with that. What does happen as well is that when someone walks in the brewery, as we were saying before, they might find some aromas which are not common in the world of beer or in the world of wine. And they might think that those aromas are something which they're really not. So, for example, speaking about Enococcus. Enococcus obviously is done in the world of wine. It's done a couple of weeks into fermentation when there's close to no sugar present anymore. It produces obviously lactic acid, which has an aroma, the aroma of yogurt, which goes away during aging. Very volatile aroma. That same aroma of yogurt, I'm sure, gentlemen, you've been through this while doing a kettle sour. You have the day you walk back into your kettle sour, it reeks of yogurt because that's lactobacillus, which has been producing lactic acid, which is still floating around there because you still haven't boiled it out. Then when you boil it, obviously you strip it all out, and so that lactic acid aroma is gone. So this yogurt-like aroma is gone, and you just have your lactic flavor to it. When we do Enococcus, we, on one beer in particular, do it right before packaging, like literally, and before putting it in the serving tank. And so I try to capture that lactic acid aroma, which combined with the red fruit character that our red grapes that we use for that gets into anything ranging from a strawberry milkshake to a cherry yogurt. And it's really interesting because it's a flavor which you don't find in the world of beer and don't find in the world of wine. And so, well, you would in the world of beer if you had a lactic kind of infection of some sort in a bottle, of course. But that's, something kind of hard to get a hold of, know. So it's very peculiar. And that can, even for trained tasters, that can take, them off track. Because it's like you go through your mental Rolodex of all your off flavors and flavors. And you're like, oh, what is this? And you're like, oh, well, it might be VDK.
Well, I think it's fascinating, too, that because the process is so unique, you're able to, during the process of figuring out how to do it best, find these flavors that you think are interesting and figure out how to capture them, even if they're not necessarily traditional or known, just because they're cool and they're different and they taste good. We talked to Judd a little bit about this as well, with maybe people coming in with preconceived notions of what the product is or what it's going to taste like. How do you educate, or how do you prepare people who come in for what they're about to drink? Because a lot of your beer is served still or low carbonation level too, right? To more mimic the wine.
I wish it was that easy. I honestly think that our best weapon is to get the beer to speak by itself, because it's hard even with trained people. I'm not pretentious to say education, but when you get someone who has been to sommelier classes and is a beer judge and has been through the BJCP, there are people which are highly trained and they think exactly like you do when you're judging a beer, which is judging it in a box, right? You want to make the perfect pale ale. Well, you have your style reference beer. That's it, so that's how it works. So education is very complicated and to do, I have to think.
I think on top of that, though, the wave that he started bringing the American craft beers into Italy, how the people were really shocked by tasting those for the first time. It's the same wave that we're riding right now as far as people tasting the Oenobeers haven't really experienced anything like that before.
It's something so new.
It's so different, exactly. And they range from being, like you said, more on the beer side to being more on the wine side. Some are more classic beer experiences as far as the mouthfeel. Others are more venuous and dry in the finish, but it's so new that people seem to be pretty open by it if you just let them taste the beer. Like you said, trying to explain it is a lot more of a complicated process than just enjoying it.
Yeah.
I think you're right, Mike.
Well, I mean, because there is this like style, right, called Italian grape ale that is now in the BJCP regulations, I think, as of 2015.
Absolutely.
But it's not that helpful, it seems like.
Absolutely. So it's
just
An acknowledgement that it exists, but it's not so great at
it's a
defining
local
it.
style on page 90, the last page of the BJCP, which basically says that it's of any color, of any strength, made with grapes in Italy. And I think that Italian grape ale is actually a really interesting style, which is very much like if you think of Chardonnay from Burgundy, right? And Chardonnay, New World Chardonnay, right? It's or Alambic, right? So Alambic, you really can't make it in the U.S. or in Italy. You got to make Alambic style ale.
Like champagne.
Right.
You can't call it a champagne because it's not from the Champagne region of France.
And Italian
you
grape
call it a
ale,
Prosecco
same
or
thing.
something.
Italian grape ale style for me. So that's why I choose to find another word instead of saying, "Hey, I make Italian grape ales." Just.
Should we taste some Italian grape ales?
Yes,
Because I
please.
think we have some in front of us,
Yes.
and all this talk about, kind of tasting it and having a hard time describing it. I would love to kind of taste through some with you guys.
What you want to start with?
Dealer's choice. So you brought 3 with you, right?
Yes. Well, let's start with something which is something more familiar to the majority of our patrons, which is basically an IPA. It's an IPA made with a plethora of hops and with a
You got Riesling grapes.
reasonable percentage of Riesling grapes. Yes, it's around 9 or 10%. And
Chardonnay yeast as well.
the Riesling grapes are biodynamic grapes from Oregon. Biodynamic meaning that they are they're grown naturally without any sulfites added. So that means that there's going to be a lot more bacteria, mold, and yeast to fight and play with, But yeah, this was I wanted to do something that can resonate with, people who are just dipping their feet into this and maybe are not like completely ready to jump into it,
Right. I mean, you start with the aroma, and it you do get the hop aroma for sure, but there's that undertone of sort of that acidic quality. And my vocabulary is probably going to butcher what you've made here, but it has that kind of acidic undertone that you're used to smelling when you smell a glass of like white wine.
Yeah, think of Riesling. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the acidity is a component that you would normally not really, hopefully not really find in an IPA, right? So
I get like melon and in front of that acid on the front. It's really nice.
Yeah.
A lot of lychee, lychee, flowery, floral smell. I think the really cool thing is the journey this one takes you on from starting out like an IPA and finishing dry and juicy.
Yeah.
It's really neat.
well, it is made with only German hops. So that's
not
why
as traditional, or maybe
Not an American
traditional
IPA.
is the wrong word, but American IPA,
Exactly.
yeah, right. More of that noble character.
But I do like that, floral grassiness, and that does shine a little bit more with, German hops, even if of the new varieties, But yeah, so melon, definitely there for sure.
And I love how dry it finishes as well.
Well.
I mean, people think of like Riesling. A lot of people think of Riesling as like a sweet, like can be a cloyingly sweet. Not that all Rieslings are sweet, but this has a really nice dry finish to it, which I think. What's the alcohol on this one?
6.8, is that correct, Mike?
6%, 6, I believe.
Are you sure?
No.
Mid to upper sixes.
Very good.
But by your standards, that's a session beer.
It is.
Because you brought one that goes up to 19%.
Yeah, we do have one of those here, which is made with oysters. Just, something fun. My favorite oysters.
Yeah, grapes wasn't enough. You needed oysters.
No,
too.
yeah, well.
that's awesome. Yeah.
Grapes done,
We did that. Let's try oysters.
Hey, Jay Parker here, the guy behind the camera. Let me ask this question, just as somebody. You hear oysters as somebody that doesn't make beer for a living, right? What does that mean when you say, yeah, I made it with oysters, right? Because inside of my head, it might be totally different than what's actually happening versus fresh versus a powdered oyster or something like that. Can you explain that to me?
Sure. So, short reply to that question is that we actually popped around 150 oysters in the boil here for a very short amount of time. But boiling, we pasteurized it, so we're safe, good to drink. That's the short version. The longer version is that oyster beers is a historical style that comes from London, of course, and so oysters were used historically in the 1700s, 1800s, I think something like that, to filter beer through. So obviously they would get the oyster shells, they would powder them down. The powder of the oyster shells would make this filtrating bed through which is like
Diatomaceous earth.
Thank you very much, whoever that was.
I got you.
Yeah. DE, I think, is the
DE.
industry.
Yeah,
Done.
DE is easier. Yeah, just don't remember diatomaceous earth. Too long.
And so basically, they use that technique so much that they sort of depleted the Thames from oysters at a certain point. Also because peasants were eating them all the time. It was like this thing that everybody, wasn't really expensive and high end thing like today.
It's funny how that works. How the low end thing becomes the high end thing. Like
Absolutely.
oysters. I mean, lobsters. They used to feed to prisoners, and now it's like $1,000 a pound for a lobster.
Absolutely. And so what happened is that then other breweries started saying that there was a particular touch coming from that oyster filtration, maybe a minerality, etc. And so then they started creating the oyster stout style, which was then made by major breweries, and so on. Now today it's a style, but this is not a stout.
I'm sorry, follow-up question. I'm sorry, I have to ask this one. So oysters are an aphrodisiac, right? So is it safe to say that this
It's a good date night beer.
drink is something you want to you pass along by the case, sort of thing?
I think that it's what does that is probably more than 19% in this in small doses, but but there's that, but yeah, I guess so.
Technically, all Oenobeers are an aphrodisiac, so.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's a great answer to that.
They work well.
Thank you, Mike.
Oh, that's great. That's good stuff.
Well, do you want to?
Yeah, we could
Try the oyster beer.
Yeah, we should taste through it.
How do we?
I think we might need a couple more glasses. Jay's going to hook us up on those.
I love though, what you said is exactly right. Like it starts as an IPA and finishes as a white wine, and it's so neat to take that whole journey in one sip every time. And I think it's almost different. I feel like I think so hard about getting complementary flavors in a beer that you taste all at the same time, right?
Yeah.
So you get the coffee and the cardamom and the orange peel. So I don't want you to have those together. Whereas this is it's
like a journey
spectrum
kind of,
through.
yeah. And the great thing about it, you talk about this as being an intro to what you're doing, and it couldn't be more perfect because it starts as an IPA, the beer everybody knows, and it ends as an Eno beer, which is the beer that you're trying to transition everyone into.
Absolutely.
So
That's part of what really gravitated me towards Liberati was in a world like we're living in today, especially in Denver, man, it's hard to be surprised or find something new in something like an IPA. People start to feel like they've tried it all, and the only way to do new stuff is to add new fruit to it or something crazy to it. And this just being basic, a basic Eno beer, if you will, is just so different and unique and kind of incomparable, if you will.
Yeah.
Taste it's so suggestive that I'm trying to smell oysters now.
I think there was a brininess in it.
Yeah.
But I don't think that we get it in the smell, personally. I've tried hard to dig in there. In the smell, I get more. In the aroma, I get more peaches, apricots, that kind of mature yellow stone fruit. Yeah. Do you say yellow fruit in America, or do you say just stone fruit? Because we say yellow fruit in Italy to say the stone fruit.
We just say stone fruit.
I've
only said stone fruit before. Yeah,
yellow fruit makes me. I don't know. It's not one I've heard in that way before.
Yeah, I just think of lemon.
Never yellow fruit.
Yeah. Don't say that.
I'm not going to do yellow fruit.
You are not welcome back on Beercraft. Good
That's
sir.
it. Yellow fruit. That's it. It's disgusting.
All right, thanks everybody. Yeah, we're gonna shut this down.
Good show.
Oh man.
Oh man.
Well, this obviously comes from the fermenter still, so I have to give it a light filtering, and then obviously it has to be carbonated.
Yeah, but the flavor profile is great. I think I appreciate you bringing the fun stuff, even if it's not 100% ready to serve out the taps. But it's got a really nice flavor to it. And I think once it has a little carbonation to it, it'll help bring a lot of those flavors out.
Yeah, some of that kind of accentuate that a little bit of brininess from the oysters.
Yeah.
It's strange that it's not boozy, being close to 19%.
Yeah, I was
going to
say that. It doesn't taste like a 19% beer, which is a little dangerous.
I think the Brett and the grapes on a majority of our beers really seem to mask the alcohol that's in them. I mean, we have a bunch that are between 10 and 19, and they all seem to drink like they're between 6 and 8. I think this one's seems a little more boozy just being uncarbonated, but as soon as that gets in there, they're all very easy drinking. Almost summertime-like, if you will. It's hard to find a summery beer with ABVs that high, but they go down really easily.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, and you guys use, for most of your beers, you use Brettanomyces as the yeast, right?
Yep.
Which is used selectively by brewers in specific circumstances, but you use it pretty much exclusively to ferment all of your fructose, all of the grapes.
Well, the first two beers are finished with another yeast, but they start with Brett. And the reason why we start with Brett is because we want to have a really good competitor against all the wild, bad stuff, which is floating around, which is on the grapes. And so because we don't naturally use any sulfites, and Brett eats up to septimaltose, so it eats basically everything. It's very resilient to different kinds of acidity, lower acidity as well, and it really outcompetes other yeasts very well.
So when regular wine is fermented, run us through that process on a basic level. You have your grapes; they have microbes on the grapes. Do those get crushed, and that's what ferments the?
In natural wines, yeah, but that's just a thing that happens these days. Normally, wine is monoinoculated and is then.
So they use sulfates to kill all of the microorganisms
To start with.
in the grapes.
Yes.
Start with it's basically analogous to boiling your wort.
Mm-hmm.
You boil your wort as a brewer to kill all the
Exactly.
microbes, and then you pitch the one yeast that you want. So in the wine world, you kind of use these sulfates to kill all the microbes, and then you put the one you want.
Yeah, and it's a fine balance in the world of wine, because obviously sulfites prevent oxidation as well, and it reacts with oxygen. So basically, neutralizing the how do you say this in English? Let's say the action of the sulfites. Sure. So basically what happens is you harvest and you start using sulfites already in powder form so that you don't oxidize your grapes. Truck all that to a certain table that then goes into a crusher along with all the powder. The powder liquefies, and now you don't have, obviously that powder's eaten up all the oxygen, plus has killed all the yeast there, or actually probably is not killed, has diminished the charge of that, the quantity of that yeast, bacteria, mold. So then when you pitch a healthy yeast, that basically overpowers all the yeasts, molds, and bacteria which are naturally present, and so basically is the one that comes out. But then 2 years ago, went to a winemaking symposium in Sacramento, where it was about Brettanomyces, the first one about Brettanomyces, and everyone there was convinced that their wine didn't really have Brett in it. But, it was kind of funny because then there was a study and they took 10 commercially available bottles, which notoriously don't have Brett in them, and found Brett in them like 9 out of 10. So, I mean, it's there. It's not empowered. It doesn't give the Brett flavor. It's not the primary flavor, but it's there. It's same way here. All these beers are technically infected with some natural bacteria or mold or yeast, just because the grapes are just full of it.
And we're using actual grapes. There's never any concentrate or grape juice, so they're actual pails of grapes. So they're just covered in that stuff, basically.
Well, we also do use other we use concentrate. We also use juices. We use grapes. We use must. I mean, we use a little bit of everything. But mainly, we want to stick with matter, just because there's so much flavor and color and tannins and aromatic qualities that you can get from grapes, from the skins, from the pulp, the matter.
Right.
That's why we actually use that. But we don't for everything. I mean, for example, for white wine, you never use skins in the white wine production. So, I mean, it's really, really not necessary to start with grapes to start with. As an idea, we use it as well sometimes just to play around, but it's not something that we're against.
I think it's kind of cool to walk into a brewery and see a grape press.
Right.
You guys have a lot of specialized equipment that you use to process whole grape vines.
Yep.
How you kind of see brewers doing this once a year during the hop harvest, where they'll do a wet hop beer, but you can do the same thing with grapes as a harvest beer, right?
Absolutely.
Get the grapes on the vine and
Looking
process
forward to do it this year. Absolutely.
Yeah.
In September, hopefully I can see you guys coming and stomping on some grapes with us
I'll
in
get
our
my feet
fountain out
going.
there.
If we get to stomp, I'm there.
Well, you get to drink while you do it as well.
Yeah,
So,
drink.
super good.
Yeah,
so.
let us know. We sign us up.
Happy to be there for
Does
that.
does it become a sort of a consistency issue, I imagine, like these large wineries trying to produce the same flavor profile over and over and over again, so they need their monoculture, they need the sulfites to wipe out that yeast.
Absolutely.
So is that just not a concern? Is each batch a little bit different?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of different things to say about that. So, for example, Yellowtail?
Yeah.
So Yellowtail, that's the Budweiser of wine, right? So enormous crops all blended together exactly like you would imagine, like Bud does. The blending to get to a consistency, everything is pasteurized, everything is, sulfites, everything is gone to that point. On the other spectrum, you have very small appellations, very small, like, half an acre of people who are making 500 bottles, 1,000 bottles of wine, obviously different from one moment to the other. What we have to face is, because our production is even smaller than that, imagine, so we don't even use an acre of grapes to make a batch of beer. You probably use a very small section. I haven't really quantified it, but that's really interesting to geek out on at a later date.
Small apartment worth of wine.
Small apartment worth of. And obviously, if you imagine that, in a valley, you're going to have the lower of the same appellation. You're going to have the lower part, which is going to have a slightly different soil. It's going to have slightly different climatic qualities, and a higher part of the hill where you're going to have slightly different climatic qualities there as well, and different soil qualities there as well. If our grapes are picked from one side, from the top or the bottom of the valley, you're going to have different grapes. So there is going to be some small nuance of difference, and this is scientifically speaking. Now, obviously, if then we have to go and speak about taste, am I able to taste the difference between two same batches, one with the grapes grown on top of the hill and one with... I hypothesize it probably not, but, to be determined. But scientifically, yes, it is different. Barley and hops is not as different, I think.
Right. So I guess I want to get to the question of the month. Is this even beer? We're talking a lot about wine and the nuances that go into making wine. Do you classify? I mean, there's obviously the legal aspect of you are a brewery producing beer with an X percentage of barley, but just do you consider this a beer? Do you consider it a wine, or do you kind of consider it its own category with what you're making now?
Shall we go on that last one while we're talking about this? Because this is probably one of the... So this has the first rule of the book is don't oxidize your beer. This is purposely oxidized, enormously oxidized. The percentage of grapes, thank you very much, sir, being such a... Look at that. It's flat, which is something else that, you wouldn't really find in the world of beer. It does have a high acidity, but it also has an enormous residual sugar. Whoops. And
why are you intentionally oxidizing the beer?
Taste it out.
I've tried it before.
That's a great question. Why would you intentionally oxidize a beer?
Well, I think that when you smell oxidation in here, that oxidation metals in all the different flavors that you have. So you have high alcohol content and high acidity. The high alcohol content and the acidity is balanced by the sweetness. If you get those three things by themselves without any meddling agent, I think it would be a little bit disconnected as a beer. And I think that oxidation actually at this point, really combines everything into this and changes the kind of fruit aromas that you have. This is much more of a overripe fruit, more than a shiny underripe or, perfectly ripe berry, This is something which is over. And all these characteristics are typical of wines which get oxidated,
Right.
like Port Madeira.
Right. So this is sort of modeled after a port wine, which is intentionally oxidized, even though I don't think I've ever heard of a beer being designed to be oxidized. But I love the idea of taking that concept from another fermented beverage and using it as kind of this emulsifier of flavors, if you will, to kind of bring everything together.
But I often think if you like a Russian Imperial Stout or an English barley wine or an old ale or something, I do kind of think about, you should drink this in 2 years.
Good point.
With some oxidation on it. But this, it's really good. It brings the flavors together really nicely.
Yeah.
And I think, I'm excited about this too, because I think it's not just sort of the hybrids or what we're putting in beer. It's also let's talk about the way we serve beer. Cold, carbonated, with a giant foamy head. Let's serve it still, room temperature.
Warmer, yeah.
Serve it in a cordial glass. Drink it with a cigar. Whatever.
So guys, is this beer?
That's what you're supposed to answer.
Come on. I played it well up to now.
You did. No, that's great.
Well, it's got 51% fermentables. Beer.
Actually, more. 35%. Only 35% of this is grape.
Oh wow.
I mean, if you handed this to me and said, "Is this a beer?" I would say absolutely not. Is it delicious? Absolutely. But the two are not mutually exclusive. You can have something that's a hybrid it's not beer, but it's delicious. It's got a lot of depth of flavor. I would imagine this works really well with food, almost as like a dessert beer, a dessert wine.
But you get some old English ale, old English ale kind of umami notes to it
absolutely.
that make you think about that as well a little bit, right? And it's sort of like a duck rabbit if you think about it. Have you seen that duck rabbit thing? Yeah. You look at it like that is a duck, and you look like that it's a rabbit. That design, it's actually a philosophic theory.
You put that on your glass. Have like a beer wine. That
there was actually another brewery which is already doing it.
Oh,
Duck
really?
Rabbit.
Oh, Duck Rabbit. Yeah, but just do some other kind of like wine glass, beer glass, and turn it on its side.
But I think that's what happens. It's like, is it this beer? Is it wine? Or is it beer? And sometimes it's like that. The first one, the IPA, more beer. The second one, I'd say Duck Rabbit for me. Sometimes beer, sometimes something a little bit different. This something probably not beer. I think that there's a spectrum in how much grape you want to use and how you want to use it.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can brew a Kolsch with 9% of Pinot Grigio grape, which is very nice and subtle and clean, and still keep it a Kolsch. Or you can brew something like that, which is quite far from the normal concept of beer, although still legally being it. Right?
And the spectrum is actually part of what's so great about it. I mean, we've had phenomenal success at wine festivals and things like this where it goes both ways. People that typically like wine and don't like beer, they're like, wow, I actually like this beer. For the first time, I like a beer. And it goes the other way. People that don't like wine are like, wow, this is tastes like wine, but I like it. So the spectrum varying, I think, is key to it also. Yeah,
and that was something I was thinking earlier when we were talking about kind of the education and just sort of keeping your mind open to the expectations. Is I've been into Liberati. I had the whole flight, and I'd almost recommend go in many times and try them. Try one or two because they're all so different. Like I said, if you run the spectrum from beer to port. Right, that's it's hard to take all that in at once.
Yeah, I agree with that. With that statement, go many times to Liberati.
Go many times.
That's definitely
let all of our guests know where you guys are.
24th in Champa in Curtis Park, so 2403 Champa. And, yeah, we got, big building, parking, so it's easily
beautiful outdoor patio.
It is, yeah. So
with fountain.
Italian marble, everything.
food, great.
Yeah,
let's not forget
Yeah,
that.
we're running low on time, but I do want to touch on the food because you guys have a full kitchen, and you really take Italian food to what it is. You make your own dough from scratch. You make your own pasta. You make your own gelato. When I walked through your kitchen, I was like, wow, this is an impressive outfit.
It's labor of love.
Yeah.
Hey, man, why didn't you have that guy bring down some food, man? Saying all that, I mean,
Well,
not
maybe
for
we'll
nothing.
go there after the show.
I don't consume alcohol, so I'm just left hanging in the wind back
there's
here.
Well, they got
Plenty more,
sodas and they have other non-alcoholic beverages.
There's plenty more
Absolutely.
NO beers to try, so maybe we'll have to have Alex back for one of our beer and food shows.
I
Yeah.
agree.
Well, he'll be
I
on the
love that.
Modern Eater show sometime in July, I think, is
True.
what we finished on. I can't remember when either,
Absolutely.
but he'll be on that, and we'll do food then. So, okay, you get a pass.
Yeah, the food's great.
Yeah, and we're rolling out our new summer menu on the 12th, so that's going to be really interesting. We're not just doing traditional Italian, and we try to adventure in some new cuisine as well, which is going to be really interesting.
Any
yeah.
nuggets of sneak peek info you can let people know, or is it all exclusive?
Well, you take our Italian traditions, and you see them out of the eyes of someone which has been living here now for a couple of years, and you start thinking, well, how do we mix this? Because I do love a lot of flavors that we have here. We're here close to Federal, which is just a wonderful place to go out and eat out, where there's all these different flavors and all things that, being Italian, you're not really used to because we're really traditionalist, But I think that there's space for even more creativity. So come and discover.
I think he's putting green chili on everything.
Yeah. The green
And red
right
chili,
there.
don't forget.
the red chili. Well, I like it. You're taking the beer and wine and you're putting those together. You're taking the Italian food and hybridizing it as well. I think it's a really fun project, and everybody, you really got to go check this out. They're making some world class stuff, and it's right in our backyard. So go check them out. And thanks so much for coming on the show. I feel like
you
we
guys for
just
having us.
scratched the surface of NO beers and of food, and we'd love to have you back on to talk more.
Absolutely.
In the future.
I am definitely committed to Oenobeers, so absolutely.
Well, once you get a
let
tattoo,
me know.
you can't go back.
Oh, it's fake. It just washes off. But yeah, no, anytime, guys. Thank you so much for having us. It's been really a pleasure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks. So we'll be back next Monday, 4 o'clock, moving on into Is This Beer?
Yep. Join us next week.